we're back.
After
Back-
how many months?
Oh my gosh, it's been almost 7 months to the day because we were going to do it in May and here we are in June and our last episode was November 7th. So almost to the day. So we're back here for part 2 of our 12th house episode. For our timestamp purposes, we're June 3rd, 2024. It's 11:12 a.m. Pacific time. Although I started the recording at 11:11, so we're just going to say that. And I'm in Whatcom, Washington. All right. So I re-listened to our part 1, and I was actually pretty stoked about what we covered. I think we did a really good job at grasping the ideas surrounding the 12th house, and now I think we should take it into a more tangible, where is that showing out in earth, in life.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was originally thinking this might be a shorter episode, but who knows, we might get into it. And then I also have 3 chart examples that I think are cool to look at. So what topics does the 12th house encompass? So many things. Okay. The 12th house by nature has associations with both internal and external, because what we're talking about with all the psyche type realms of stuff is 12th housey, but then houses in general all represent external areas in life, right? So we're looking at both of those when we're looking at the 12th house. So the first is, like I said, that psychological unconscious that can show up in many, many different ways, just the collective unconscious and how we connect to realms of spirituality and stuff like that. When I think of the collective unconscious, I always think of the way mycelium works, like in mushrooms or in trees, and how it's like this root system that they communicate the important things that are coming, like danger is coming or a storm or something is coming, and they all communicate that through this root system. I just feel like for humans, our root system is more like in the air and ethers, and that to me is our collective unconscious, how we're communicating unconsciously, but as a collective there are things that are downloaded or dispersed among all of us.
I feel like TikTok is really designed for that. With like the algorithm and stuff, right? Because it feels like there have been times where like I've started to feel something and my algorithm shifts with my feelings where I'm getting like different things. But I also feel like if you wanted people to kind of almost inception latch on to an idea, you know, where it's like planting that seed of an idea in your brain or whatever, that's like a good place to do it. Just get enough people spreading this thing and then it turns into this big like collective unconscious, like, I don't know. I feel like that's how trends happen. Like trends and like things that like go viral or whatever, where for a while like everybody's talking about it, or like everything becomes like, you know, we all like share this like same idea or something like that. It's because of things like that where it just gets like spread out.
Yeah, I like that idea. That's a super tangible concept for a non-tangible thing. Then the next thing about the collective unconscious is that generational trauma and the epigenetics that we talked about in the first part, which is super interesting. So if you haven't listened to the first part or watched the first part, go ahead and go back. I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere once this is published. Self-undoing is an interesting thing with the internal part of the 12th house. So we can talk about like the shadow side or our projections, our fears that are not necessarily tangible, but you know, those lurking feelings, and there's lurking things in the back of our mind. The unconscious patterns of self-sabotage, like you were talking about, that backpack full of stuff that we have that we might not be fully aware of what we're carrying around, but are playing into how we do our life.
Yeah.
The negative self-talk and limiting beliefs that we all have to deal with. It can also talk about dreams and rest, because this house often gets lumped under the phrase of like the I dream house. And so I think that's like has to do with the broad association with Neptune that we also talked about in the first part. But just because dreams are like astral projection type happenings, they can be good or bad, right? So when we're
Mhm.
talking about self undoing, like we have to remember that nightmares are also considered a dream. Like
Mhm.
our fears can play out in that realm, or just phobias in general, like an extreme or irrational fear to something. So like the things that become our outer demons and our inner demons, like those would be the projections. Like if we're fearing spiders internally, we'll project that and maybe we'll come across like a spider's nest or something, like the internal outernal link, I think is what I was getting at.
And I think with the dreams and rest too, like going back to like this idea of whether or not we can see the stuff that's happening in the 12th house, I think we can become more aware of that stuff because for me, when I have dreams, a lot of the time if I wake up within a few minutes, I'll just forget everything about the dream. And I'll be having like a super intense dream. I'll be real plot heavy, like a lot's going on. It's like very intense. And then like I'll wake up and it kind of just dissipates. And I'm left with sort of just a vague feeling of the dream,
Mm,
right? Where it's like there will be things throughout the day that sometimes might make me kind of have that same feeling again, but I still can't remember it. But when I take the time, if I get in the habit where like every morning I'm writing down my dreams, I'll start to remember more and more. Like it doesn't dissipate and go away. I'll start to actually remember them in total because I'm paying attention to them. And so I feel like the 12th house is the same with all of these unconscious things like self sabotage phobias, all that kind of stuff that kind of like maybe we aren't fully aware of, like where it's coming from or why or whatever. But if we start to examine it, like when we're doing shadow work and stuff like that, or going to therapy or like whatever, right? You're like kind of like looking more directly at it instead of it being
mm-hmm.
kind of like in your periphery or like behind your head. And then you're able to see it more clearly and you're kind of able to like, I think, pull it out of the 12th house. So it's not just this thing that's like sitting behind you, kind of like whispering in your ear, and you're like, wait, what was that? Like,
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Also, 12th house can talk about like actual paranormal activity, so like literal ghosts, because we were talking about ghosts as a non-literal, like the things that haunt us throughout the day. We had a nightmare, we have that lingering feeling, but it can also talk about literal spirits, apparitions, whatever you want to call them. Um 12th house, I think we touched on earlier, has just a very overwhelming, I don't know if that's the right word, theme of just the hidden. So
mhm,
anything that's hidden from us. So it could be strengths, it could be our weaknesses, our fears, desires, um, fears that are playing on us to the point where we self sabotage or paralyze ourselves, but may also be subconscious driving factors to achieve something or to seek out spiritual connection. So the spiritual connection part obviously comes in with Neptune, but when I thought about fears leading to us wanting to have a higher connection to something, I think about Western religions and how a lot of them play heavily on like the fear, say like guilt or
mhm,
sin or like
mhm,
um, eternal damnation, right? And how like the unforeseen, say, hell for somebody can encourage people or encourage believers in that to really deepen their connection to a more to a god or a spiritual
mhm.
entity or something.
Or fears of the stuff that's going on in the world too, like wanting to believe that there's something, that there is something beyond just
Right.
like the here and now, because, with everything that's like happening in the world, even just like right now, today, can drive people to like want to have that. There must be something more out there. There must be some kind of like divine justice or something like that. So, like, and that's another thing that like trying to pull that out of that and bring it into the real world. Like I feel like a lot of the stuff in the 12th house is stuff that like we need to like kind of like reach in and like pull it out and like make it like visible or known because it's like that's where a lot of the, I don't know, I feel like when it festers back there, that's when it starts to turn into like
Yeah,
like stressful stuff. So
absolutely. I agree. Speaking of which, the next point I was going to make is things that feel denied or out of reach. So that same idea you're just talking about. So, in comparison with like tangible, so that was more of the untangible stuff, right? If we're
Mhm.
thinking about tangible, how does this play out on earth in our life? What areas are we looking to for 12th house areas? um some people associate groups to the 12th house, but I want to make a really clear distinction, because the 11th house is also a house of groups, like groups and associations. Um,
Mhm.
so where the 11th house, which obviously we'll do an episode on that too, so stay tuned. The
The
11th,
last episode. We're gonna
right? Oh
end on the
yeah.
11th house.
Stay tuned for a long time. um, the 11th house can refer to groups that have similar motives or similar goals in mind. So it could be a friend group, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could just be affiliations or clubs or associations that have a common goal. Whereas the 12th house can deal with groups, but they're more isolated and hidden groups because that's where the 12th house realm comes in. So when we're looking at groups that are, say, marginalized from mainstream society, or let's just pushed to the side, treated differently, whatever, where the 12th house can be a tangible representation in like the homeless and transient population, or literally impoverished people, like anyone below the poverty line, are normally, quote, looked down upon in society. Um, People with addictions, because you have that element of um, not acceptable, right? These people
Mhm.
have a problem, so they're already marginalized for
And they're
their
trying to
thing,
hide it a lot of the time, like, I mean,
right?
a lot of people who have addiction are trying to hide it from like the other people in their family or from their work or whatever to
Yes,
avoid being ostracized within their 11th house groups, basically, like in order
yes,
to like, it's like in order to keep yourself good with like the other people in your groups, it's like, or like even hiding like, like mental illness and stuff or things like of that. And it's just like any of the stuff I feel like that's like, I'm going to try to hide the things about myself that I feel aren't acceptable, I guess, to other people.
exactly, yeah. And with the association with this house with Neptune, Neptune has a lot to do with the type of, mental health and addiction type things. Um, it can also deal with groups, any types of groups that are kept within conditions of bondage, oppression, slavery, stuff like that, because that's kind of, we talked about the association with Saturn in our last part, and Saturn has restrictions on people, right? They put boundaries up for certain groups of people. So in that aspect, we can think of places like prisons or insane asylums, concentration camps, reform places, right?
Mhm.
And then with the mental health, where, mental institutions, hospitals, also places where people are suffering, or places where suffering is the norm, right? Like hospitals, you're there because
Mhm.
there's an ailment or a sickness, right? Um, and when we're talking about like places of isolation or places of confinement, I guess, this can be voluntary or involuntary. Like we were talking about
Mhm.
addiction issues. Sometimes your family puts you into rehab, and sometimes you come to the conclusion, you see your backpack, you see it's full of these
Mhm.
things, and you're like, I need help. And then you voluntarily seek out that help. So,
Mhm.
12th house can also deal with charities. I want to say I talked about this a little bit in the first part, but I don't remember. Um, but any institutions that's providing welfare for people in need. So we're going back to that karmic self sacrifice on behalf of the collective. Like, I feel like I need to pay my debts off and help this marginalized group, or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, put in work to better my karma.
Mm-hmm.
Any other um, ideas you can think about for 12th house tangible or intangible places in life?
No.
Okay, just curious. How about 12th house perfection years? So, first off, what the heck is a perfection? So, without going too deep, an annual perfection is annual perfections is an ancient Hellenistic technique where we look at what age a person is going into that correlates to what themes are going to happen for that year of life. And I know you've been keeping track of perfections. Um,
Since my last 12th house perfection. So
nice.
that was
Yeah.
when I started. So,
I really like it because it's just like one of the easiest yet most profound, like, you just
mhm.
have to look at your age and what what house
Yeah.
that correlates to, and then hopefully by the time you're at that house we'll have an episode for you to dive into and figure out what themes can
Hmm.
start playing out for you. But basically perfection is just like a fancy word to mean to progress, so it's a way of progressing through your chart and learning from different houses of your chart. So at each birthday of life, we're activating one of our 12 houses. And it goes by age, like I said. And I'm sure I'll have a cheat sheet somewhere attached to at least one of these episodes. But age is 0. So from the day you were born to when you turn 1, you're in a first house. So you just have to remember that you kind of skip a house when you go around. Um, so 0 to 1 is first house, 1 to 2 is second house, so on and so forth around the chart, and then basically repeat. But if you have a handy cheat sheet, just look up your age.
Hmm.
And I am wanting to do a deeper dive into this, so hopefully one day I'll have a course ready that maybe you can help me with, Mish. That'd be great. So for 12th house perfections, you're looking at the ages of 11, 23, 35, 47, 59, 71, 83, so on and so forth if your life is continuing in such a manner. I was trying to think of 12th house examples. I think you're going to be better at this because like I said, my 12th house seems to be more like true hidden 12th house nature and more elusive. But when I was making my notes, I did think that my first 12th house perfection year at age 11, the biggest thing that happened to me that year was I started my period. And I found this to be an interesting thing. Like, I, when we're looking at perfections, it's really important. I think this is just like a side note, but like to not undermine any, like, any happenings. I think even small, seemingly insignificant things can still like play a part in bigger cycles or
Hmm.
bigger things. So, because without really diving into history, the only thing I can think of that was significant for age 11 for me was starting my period. But then I looked at my 12th house is a Cancer house, which means it's ruled by the moon. And the moon obviously has a lot to do with cycles and the feminine, and therefore, the menstrual cycle. And my moon is in Aries. And so I know this is a long stretch, but like the correlation of Aries being known as the god of war, and war is bloodshed. So bloodshed in a Cancerian manner to me seems like menstruation.
I mean, I could see it. Like, I feel like it's like like it can show up in so many different ways. Like it really just depends. And I feel like too, it's gonna be different for everybody what the themes are because we might associate different things. Like me personally might associate different things with like like what would be important to me, right? Because like, if you're looking at a particular house and the themes of that house, that the things that might affect me most might not be what affects another person most, like in that
Hmm.
house. And so like I think the thing that like was really useful to me in terms of trying to figure this out. And it was definitely a lot of like work to do, but was like making that spreadsheet that I have where it's every single year of my life with the Profection year and any kind of significant astrological events that were going on at that time. Like if I had my Jupiter return or things like that. Because then I would just write off to the side, what are the things that I remember about what happened to me in that year to try to get a sense of a pattern, like what are the things, that like happen in 12th house years or things like that. For me with mine, I think part of the reason that like it's uh easy for me to sort of spot those things in the 12th house is because I have a Scorpio 12th house, but I also have two planets in my 12th house. So I have Pluto, but I also have Venus in there. And Venus, I think, is a big theme for me with my 12th house because a lot of what I have struggled with in my life has to do with sex or relationships, or the kinds of struggles that I've had in my relationships have dealt with that in terms of how I felt like I was treated by my partners or how it made me feel about myself to come out of that. Because I definitely felt for a long time a thing that was inaccessible to me was relationships or being loved by another person, particularly by like men. And I felt like a lot of that came from like my situations that had happened, like regarding my 12th house. So, um, my last 12th house perfection year actually happened to be the year that I met my current partners. And there was definitely a lot going on there. But the 12th house perfection year that I had had before that was the same year that I broke up and got back together with my last boyfriend, was the 12th house perfection year before that. And then the 12th house perfection year before that, when I was having some mental health issues, and also the one when I was my youngest, my first 12th house perfection year, I started my spiritual practice around that time. That was when I like was getting into stuff like tarot and all that kind of stuff for the first time. So like I went
Mm.
through phases that I'd get really into tarot and astrology and stuff like that, and then I would forget about it for years, and then I would kind of come back to it and do it. And the same thing happened this last time because it was I think in my 11th house year, I started getting back into it, but it was my 12th house perfection year where I really started like being like, oh, I'm like practicing like every moon cycle I was doing things and all that. So I feel like for me, like themes of mental health, sexuality, spirituality, like all the 12th house stuff, I see like really clearly when I look back at those things.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that's a great point. Having like you started me on having the chart of like everything that's happening that year.
Hmm.
Um which hopefully we can make. I think that'd be a cool offering to put together to somebody, a chart to fill out for
Hmm.
people. But being able to look back and remember significant things happening that year and then tracing the patterns, because it doesn't
Hmm.
always go like a linear thing, like,
Yeah.
but like seeing just the relationship between them and how they can play off each other, I think is really important.
Yeah.
And it kind of sets you up for the next time around, like, okay,
Yeah.
maybe it's time that I dive back into tarot this year. Maybe it's time that I, whatever. So,
Yeah, and I think like planning for it, like, because if I'm able to see, like, okay, well, what were the things that I struggled with, like, really heavily, like, during this 12th house perfection year? What are the things that, like, went really well? And then kind of like trying to learn lessons from that. And so then as I'm like maybe in my 11th house perfection year and I'm prepping for the 12th house perfection year, being like, okay, like, well, what is coming up? Because I kind of did that. I'm in my second house year now, but like for my first house year, I remember towards the end of my 12th house perfection year, I started getting really into this idea of like how I wanted to dress, how I wanted to look like, and
mm,
being very like, and it was interesting because there is this kind of like, because my Venus is in Scorpio, it was kind of almost like how it was like leading me into that first house
Yeah.
of like, oh, I want to like present myself differently, or like who I feel like I am now, because there had been like a lot of like really big changes in my life. And so I feel like I'm kind of like entering like a whole new phase of my life. Um, my Jupiter returns coincide with my 12th house perfection years too. So like that also like I think affects it. But yeah, so like it's like leading into the next one, like all of a sudden, like for the second house perfection year, towards the end of my first house perfection year, I was getting really concerned with like my money situation, or like, you know, what my job was, and like whether or not I enjoyed my job anymore. I think when you're aware of the perfection years, it can be interesting seeing how all of a sudden it's not like I went into it intentionally either, where I was like, oh, like
Mhm.
I'm going to start focusing on these things because of this perfection year. It was like I naturally had started to gravitate towards those topics. And then I looked back and I was like, oh, that's weird because I'm going into this topic here now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That I think through all my astrology studies that the most fascinating thing and my favorite quote from Stephen Forrest is that astrology is just finger pointing at life. So like no matter whether you're practicing or even aware of astrology, it's still happening. Therefore, it
Hmm.
has to be significant because if we're already, have this window time frame, like a couple months before our birthday, or starting to think about other things, then looking into the next perfection year can be really important in finding those patterns and stuff. But I love the idea of your 12th house Venus. So you sat and you thought about what your values are, what you find aesthetically pleasing, naturally goes into like, okay, now we're going to make this internal feeling about how we feel about
Hmm.
ourselves, an external first house, like,
Yeah.
I'm going to change my appearance. And then take that a little bit step forward and be like, well, I spent a lot of money on my hair and nails this year. Maybe I'll like budget back with my second house perfection.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely interesting how those things will show up, because the more I look at people's charts and stuff, the more I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I'll find myself whenever like somebody does something in the public eye or something, you know, that I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting thing. And I'll make some guesses. Like I'll find myself making guesses. Like, I wonder if they have like this kind of a placement or this sort of a thing going on. And then I like to look up their charts to be like, oh, like because whether I'm right or wrong, it's like interesting because I'll see like this, I like, oh, like is that why, you know, like this is
Hmm.
happening, or like how that's like showing up for them. So
Yeah. And it's a great learning tool too, because maybe you picture it like, oh, they must have this placement, but they have something else, but it still
hmm.
works. And it's a learning
Yeah.
tool to like be like, oh, that can manifest in this way also, and just add
Hmm.
more to your repertoire, your your astrology lingo.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's super fun. I like pulling charts all the time. You know you're deep in astrology if you pull charts for all the things. um so another example of 12th house was I just finished reading the book. Well, maybe a couple weeks ago or whatever. I just finished reading The Mountain is You, Transforming Self-Sabotage into Self-Mastery. And it's funny because I'm also in a second house perfection year, and she was talking about some internal values and some things that really hit me as this is what I need, because in my astrology mindset, I'm viewing everything naturally through a second house filter. But then I wonder if she was in a second house. But then I looked up the dates and I should have rethought my thinking process, but it got me there anyway. This book, the whole book is on self sabotage and traumas and internal healing, which are clearly all 12th house things that we've been talking about. So that should have been my first clue. But the author is currently 32. Um, shoot. Now I want to state her name because I stated the title and now I forgot to write down her name.
Is it Brianna
Yeah.
Wiest? Brianna Wiest.
Yes. Perfect. So she's currently 32, And the book came out in 2020, which obviously it's process to publish a book. So in my mind, I'm assuming she wrote it in 2019. And if she did, that would have been her 12th house perfection year. So she's literally writing a book about 12th house things. And
Mm-hmm.
who knows? She might be in tune with astrology. She might not be, but I thought it was a really cool, like, yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's a great example. And if I didn't see if we had a birth time or not, but it'd be even cooler if she had like a Mercury in the 12th house or something for the writing of the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I do have a few chart examples that I want to share. I'm going to share 3 charts. All of them are basically in the same line of work, the entertainment industry. But I think you'll see patterns as we go through them of why that is. The first chart I wanted to talk about, pull it up, is Meryl Streep because she's one of the greatest. Um, so there's a lot going on here, but what I want to narrow in on is Sun, Uranus, and Venus in her 12th house right here. And her 12th house is Cancer, right?
Hmm.
So first off, she won an Academy Award for Best Actress for starring as a Holocaust survivor in the movie called Sophie's Choice in
Mm-hmm.
1982. I actually have not watched that one. I want to go back and watch it now,
Yeah, I
especially.
also have not seen that. I know what it's about, but I have not seen it.
Yeah, but I just find that really fascinating because, Holocaust, especially topics of internment camps and stuff like that, is
Well,
definitely the
and the
physical.
choice that she's making is about her children, so it has to do with motherhood, which I feel is very Cancer
Ooh,
themed, you know? So it's
yes.
like 12,000 Cancer because she's making the choices, she's making which of her children is going to live.
Oh, I didn't
So,
know that.
yeah. Like I know the plot of Sophie's Choice. I've never seen it, but I'm pretty certain that that's the plot of Sophie's Choice. And
Oh my
like,
gosh, now I
yeah,
really
so
want to
that's
watch it.
like very much like
Okay, love that. Absolutely love that. Cancer, children, yes. Cancer, we also want to look to the ruler. So, Cancer's ruler is the moon. We have it up in the 10th house of public career. So, this was, you know, a career, uh, um, not decision, but a career, an act of her career. um, and moon also gives me the feeling of very, expressive, very emotional driven part, right?
hmm
um which I thought was really, really cool. uh yeah, I think that's all I had for that one. So the next one I want to look at is Jodie Foster, another actress, brilliant. For her
hmm
chart, we have Neptune, Venus, Mercury, Sun, all in the 12th house of Scorpio. So another movie I need to put on my list, apparently. But Jodie Foster's breakout role was in a movie called Taxi Driver in
hmm
1976, and she played a prostitute. And she won an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress in that role. But I think it's really cool because, like, Venus and Scorpio, as you also have Venus and Scorpio, has a lot to do with like the unseen and taboo side of relationships or
hmm
relations. And of course, we're talking about sex work here. So sex work can be seen in Venus Scorpio, I think, for me, but also in just the 12th house topics in general, being as like that's a profession that's culturally looked down upon or hidden or
hmm
pushed aside in society.
hmm
So I think that's really freaking cool. She was also quoted saying Taxi Driver was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I didn't become a weirdo or squawk like a chicken, which I thought was a really funny quote. But I think this is like really playing on that 12th house fear of being ostracized or disowned because of, playing a part of a prostitute, right?
hmm
So that was really cool.
Isn't she also in that movie where I know she's in Panic Room too, but also isn't she in that movie with where she's like on the plane and then like people don't believe like her daughter goes missing or something and people don't believe her. Let me see.
Mm. I know she's done so much.
Plane, yeah, there's a flight plan, right? So like, and people like think she's crazy, right? Because she's just like,
Mm.
she keeps saying like, no, my daughter's gone missing, and they're like, you never had a daughter here, like you're just crazy, and they keep gaslighting her and telling her like her daughter's not here, but there's some conspiracy going on. But also, she was in
Ooh.
Panic Room where she has to like hide away in this like room of the house with like it was one of Kristen Stewart's first roles, I think, is like plays her
Oh
daughter in
yeah.
that movie, and where they're like trapped in this room while these guys are trying to break into their house and like steal something that's like in the house that she didn't know about. And I feel like both of those are also kind of 12th housey because they're very like, like either people think that you're crazy and they're gaslighting, but you're trapped on a plane or you're trapped in a house. You're like,
Yeah.
she's like trapped in these places, like, and
Yeah.
like going through these very scary kinds of situations that would be kind of like almost like your internal fears of like what could like happen. I mean, that's very scary situations, like both with like a daughter too, which is like interesting. But anyway, like I just thought that that was also kind of like 12th housey to have those sorts of like
Yeah.
situations.
And the fact you said that like she thought she had a daughter, but everyone around her said she didn't, right? Something like
Hmm.
that. That seems to me very like Neptune, like the disillusionment or like illusion of like, no, I had a daughter. Like, why doesn't anyone believe me? Like, I'm trying to
Yeah.
Mercury communicate this thing, but nobody
Hmm.
believes me, right? Crazy. Okay, I need to add way more to my watch list. I'll just call it astrology research and it'll be fine. um She was also quoted cruelty might be very human, it might be cultural, but it's not acceptable.
Hmm.
And I think that quote is really awesome considering her Mercury, like we said, is in the 12th. And so she's using her Mercury to like speak out about the disillusionment of 12th house pain and suffering and like the downfall or the mistreatment of other groups of people, which I think is really cool. And then the last one, so I just like looking at quotes because, so like you were kind of saying, you see something happening in the headlines or whatever, and you're like, oh, I'm going to take a guess at this placement, look up their chart. I also like to look at what people say because usually you can hear their chart come to life, like these examples, um, with the way that they speak and the way that the words that they choose. So a lot of these examples have quotes that go along with them. But another quote that Jodie Foster said was, "My definition of a friend is somebody who adores you even though they know the things that are you're most ashamed of."
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that definitely like that all pulls together everything Venus and Scorpio and the depths of intimacy um that people need to be able to share those vulnerable things and those hidden
Hmm.
secrets and like hidden secrets in general. That's all 12th house and Scorpio stuff.
Hmm. Yeah. And feeling seen with those things. Because I
Mm,
think like feeling seen with the things that like you're most ashamed of can be like hard because it's like, oh, it's like so vulnerable to like share those things with other people. And if they see them and they like, you know, dislike you because of them or like turn away from you because of them or like, like pretend like those things don't exist about you or something that can feel like hurtful or invalidating. But I think like being able to like these are like the unseen parts of you. So like in order to see them, somebody has to be very close to you, but also like like to feel seen, I think, is a relief, like if it's seen in a good way. Like if somebody sees you
Yeah.
and they go like I see that in you, or I recognize that in you, and I either think it's a good thing, or like I it doesn't bother me, or like it's like I still love you, like, that can feel very different than like, that kind of like exposed feeling of feeling seen, where it's like, no, like somebody ripping off the covers and you're like, I wasn't ready. Like I'm like
Yeah. Yeah, totally. When you're talking about being seen, I just like thought about, so this whole 12th house is being ruled by Mars up in Leo, and Leo is like center stage, spotlight, being seen for these things. Also, it's a sign of entertainment. She's literally an actress, like playing these parts.
hmm
And to me, I always love thinking of Mars as advocacy. Like, it's just one of my favorite ways of thinking about it. And so, just like being able to play these marginalized parts, or these parts of people who are ostracized
hmm
in a entertainment field, but bringing their voices out so they can be seen. Like, hey, like, I don't know the plots of all these movies, but it sounds like she's standing up for herself and
hmm
standing her ground. These are the things I believe. I believe I have a daughter. I believe that I'm stuck, all these things. But yet, like bringing to light people who might be marginalized in society, bringing their voices to be seen and heard and felt, and on different a a different light, I guess.
hmm
Very fucking cool. Okay, my last chart. My last chart is the one, the only Madonna. So we've got a lot of stuff happening here, but we have a 12th house of Leo, which has Venus, Uranus, and the Sun. And so her whole career basically boils down to her being like just fearlessly in the limelight, embracing her sexuality as a
hmm
tool of empowerment and challenging traditional roles, of women, right?
hmm
And this is all done within her music and entertainment and within that industry, which of course Leo is the encompassing of that entertainment industry, right?
hmm
So I think that's really freaking cool. Like we talked about, sexuality, of course, can do a lot with Venus. And so some people might have seen her outwardness as like a shock. You come across a music video and like, oh my gosh, she's talking about being a virgin and stuff like that, which could bring in that field of Uranus, that just like
hmm
shock and awe and just like out of left fieldness of her sexuality. But just the fact that it was specifically as a statement of strength and empowerment for women, I think is really important when you think of the sun. And the sun is also rules Leo, so it's like extra strength because it's at home. So just like bringing to light the power that you have to be your your authentic, your, what's the word I'm looking for? Always with the words. Yeah, just like your authentic nature, I guess.
hmm
Um, so she was quoted, I laugh at myself. I don't take myself completely seriously. I think it's another quality that people have to hold on to. You have to laugh, especially at yourself. And so I see this as like a self undoing type of like, I'm going to make fun of myself before others can make fun of
hmm
me type deal, right? So it's kind of like a positive. Leo is very optimistic, a positive look on self undoing. And when we put this in like the entertainment space also, I don't know. I just thought it was a really cool quote for
hmm
just 12th house Leo.
Yeah. Yeah, because if Leo is like this like entertainer, I think it makes sense that like the things that are like that you would feel are like hidden or vulnerable, you'd want to have that kind of like control over kind of like entertaining with them, like being like, ha ha
Yes.
ha, like, before anyone else can say those things about you or tear you down with them. And it's like, no, maybe because her son is there, it's like, no, I'm going to capitalize on these things. I'm not going to hide them away. I'm not going to do that for you. I'm going to completely be out here as much as possible and like to have that power because it's powerful to be like, I'm not gonna be like hidden away. Having like Scorpio there where I'm definitely keeping everything as hidden as possible. Like, but to be like, no, I'm gonna like put it all out on display and like I'm gonna show you everything about me and be my truest, most naked self because then there's nothing that you can go hunting for. There's nothing
Mm.
to look for. It's already all out there and I've already shown it all to you. So you can't go finding anything about me that's hidden away.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
an
No, that's
interesting.
perfectly said. Yeah, I love that. Another Madonna quote is, "Poor is the man whose pleasures depend on the permission of another." So we're talking about pleasure seeking with Venus and, your value system when it comes to how you find enjoyment. And then Leo, the sign of standing out on your own and
Mhm.
putting your vulnerability, like you said, in the spotlight, like being super upfront with, nope, this is what brings me pleasure. This is what makes me happy, and I'm going for it.
And
So,
not needing anybody else to give it to you.
yeah,
Like just being like, I'm gonna like get all the pleasure myself and anybody else is kind of auxiliary, I guess. But
which is kind of like a punctuation point with her son being there. So, your son is your
Mhm.
vitality and your
Mhm.
your aim in life. So if you're going out, if you have a mission of pleasure,
Mhm.
it'll take center stage, I guess. And then another quote is, "Fame is a form of misunderstanding." So Leo 12th house right there, misunderstanding and fame. Super interesting. Yeah. Okay. Stop share. And we're back. Okay. How about some final thoughts for the 12th house? So just want to reiterate in case it wasn't clear. Every chart, everyone has a 12th house. It doesn't matter if it's empty like mine. It doesn't matter. There's always a sign on the house, and there's always a planet that rules that house. So those all play a part in how it's going to manifest and how you feel about it, how you see it or others see it. You can always gain insights looking to the sign of that house and the ruler to that house if you're that stage with your astrology knowledge. I wanted to touch a little bit more on like how we can use the 12th house to figure out what we want, where we're going, how to help ourselves and others. And you touched that on that when you said, it's just all about self-awareness.
Mhm.
Like as soon as you're aware of it, you're able to make adjustments, view that part of yourself differently, give grace to that part of yourself, whatever you need to do to be able to embrace it as part of you.
Shadow work, therapy, just anything to make it visible. Because I think like the dangers of the 12th house are the parts that are invisible or the parts that we're denying to ourselves, even, or we're just pretending like they don't exist because they're too scary for us. Because that's yourself. It feels like until you get to the point of being able to at least like look at yourself and like really see yourself fully for all the stuff that maybe you don't like about yourself or that you're afraid of about yourself or all those kinds of things, it's like those fears just rule your life because they're sitting there in the back of your head, always whispering at you, but you're like too afraid to look them in the eye or something and like, be gone or
Yeah.
join me, depending on what it is. Because I think some fears and stuff, it might be when you look at it, that fear doesn't exist anymore. Maybe you don't have that fear anymore because you dealt with it and you looked at it. And then other stuff, there might be things about yourself that you're afraid to look at because you feel like you won't be lovable or you don't like yourself or whatever. And it's more about embracing those parts or at least trying to find the way to accept those things about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the 12th house has a lot to do with interconnectivity. We're talking about that collective unconscious type dealings. Some people think that by giving is how we received. So to help ourselves out, we would want to help others out type deal. So in a 12th house instance, it's using whatever you have inherited with your 12th house for others, I think, is how we can help ourselves. So, for example, I like my Mars advocacy ness. If you have Mars in the 12th house, then giving away your Mars would look like using it as being an advocate on the behalf of other people or marginalized groups. And with like all the chart examples we looked at, these are all people who had Venus in the 12th house, which it should be no surprise, but it makes sense because of their profession. So what does it look like to give your Venus away in this example is to make art for the group, for the world. So their art is either acting, performing, singing, whatever it may be. They do it to express themselves, to express their Venus, but they're also giving it away to others. And therefore, in turn, it's a win-win. People get to see their work, and they also get to express and externalize, the things that may stay hidden or may stay internal. So I think that's pretty cool.
I wonder, like, I've seen people talk about the music that you're going to be most connected to is whatever, like, your moon sign is. I wonder if you find people who have the same 12th house sign as you, who do music or art or things like that, to look at it and see if it evokes those same kinds of subconscious things. If you feel like there's a strong connection to it because it's those 12th house topics.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to look into. It's all about like when you feel connected to something or you resonate with something, pull those charts. Pull those charts, find the patterns. Even if you like literally can only be like, oh, their moon is in the same place. Just notice what you notice, and that'll help you continue learning like how things can manifest or how things will play out and how you interact with other people's charts, right? If you're not using that planet on behalf of others, any planet in the 12th house will most likely need to be used or developed in the ways and the topics of that 12th house to fully develop and to be understood and to be integrated and be seen. Those planets, say like Venus we were talking about, need to either be developed in seclusion, like, okay, you need to sit and think about, do that shadow work on how you feel attractive, how you want to attract, stuff like that, or developed internally, so more shadow work, journaling, stuff like that. You could also be learning how that planet works in a space that's hidden from the world or in a place that's a safe sanctuary. For a more tangible example, I'm thinking of a writer. I talked about that book being possibly written during her 12th house Profection. So if you think about a writer who has Mercury in the 12th house, a good use or a good way to develop or a good way to invoke or integrate a Mercury in the 12th house would be like the novelist who has to go hermit themselves on top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere to create their life's work. Like, you're really invoking the themes or the ways of the 12th house to make that planet do what it needs to do, right?
I was going to say, because you said that, and the only writer I could think of who I know for a fact has done that is Ernest Hemingway, that he had this little thing in Idaho. And so I was like, well, real quick, what's his chart look like? And he has a Mercury and Leo in the 12th house.
Yeah. Yes. Ooh, Mercury in Leo. So he got his fame, the Leo, from writing in seclusion in a hermited fashion with plenty of addictions and
I mean,
yes, Ernest Hemingway, exactly. That's perfect. See, it's almost like astrology works. I don't know. Who knows? Um, so if you take nothing from the if you take, if you take nothing from these two giant episodes on the 12th
Hmm.
house and you look at your chart and you see you have a lot of stuff happening in the 12th house, like a lot of planets, a lot of things, just know, ooh, it's 12:12 right now. Just know that you may need extra quietness, extra stillness, extra privacy and alone time, time to go inward, time to meditate, and that dealing with like negative self-talk, self-sabotage, undoing tendencies will all be themes and important lessons that you'll need to work through. Clearly, it's not going to happen overnight, right? But they're important to work on. So give yourself the grace to just retreat and regroup before you face the world again. And if you find that giving back to your community or 12th house places bring you a sense of fulfillment, do that also, because that's a great use of 12th house planets no matter what's there, right? And I gave an example of you, but if you want to talk about your work at the assistant living facility, I think that's a
Yeah,
cool example.
yeah. I did. I worked in like because I worked in that, and then even now, technically, like higher ed is like an institution, is like
Mm.
considered an institution, and in both of those situations, um, I was, like you said, bringing fun and and pleasure, hopefully, to the to the residents. Hopefully, they enjoyed my time with them. But yeah, I used to work in activities before I did social work, and then now, one of the things I really loved about being in higher education was all the subtextual stuff, was reading stuff to find like what's the hidden meanings and these like texts and stuff, and teaching my students basically to do the same thing with the world around them. Because even now I have a lot of assignments that are about trying to create like empathy, or having them learn how to develop their critical thinking skills so that they can see the messages in propaganda or things like that are coming at them, to be able to decipher those. So I feel like a lot of the stuff that I like to do in my work has to do with 12th house themes. When I do creative writing, when I the papers that I used to write, it was always a lot of like 12th house or Scorpio things, the things that I got drawn to a lot. So
The things your Venus is attracted to.
yeah, those are the things I like to work on.
Yeah, very cool. All right. So that's the 12th house. Woo!
Oh, and
We
look,
did it.
don't look at my messy house. Anyway, um, we're still unpacking. But this is the
Mm.
collage I was working on for my 12th house, in terms of imagery that I thought associated with my 12th house with Venus, which I feel is very 12th house stuff, but also very Scorpio and Venus stuff. Yeah. There. Learned my
I
background again.
also love that there's eyes on top of it, but the
Hmm.
eyes, I think we're looking off kind of side
Yeah.
directions. So it's seeing these things. They're coming into awareness, but maybe not fully. But I'm acknowledging you.
Yeah. So
I love
anyway,
that.
that was,
Yes.
I thought I'd show that so that,
Yes. So for the listeners, we are working on a artful workshop where we can explore all the houses one by one and make beautiful art like that. So if you guys are interested, there'll be a link soon for either a wait list or to just sign up and jump into the workshops. But it'd be super fun. We'll go through all the
Mhm.
topics of the house we're working on that month to make
Mhm.
art that represents that house for us. And then by the time we're done, if you stay with us for a year, we'll have 12 little houses in a cute little neighborhood that is your
Yeah.
birth chart.
Yeah.
It'll be great. So stay tuned to learn more. All right. Thank you for being here. You're amazing. I love you very, very much.
Love you too. It was very fun.